friends, welcome to Making Disciples. My name is Chris Rogers and I am your host. I hope you're doing all right. Hope you're having a good week. Now, this episode will be going out early in Lent. So, for those that are listening in real time, I hope Lent is going well for you, and I hope that you are really using Lent as a way to get closer to the Lord. You know, giving things up, but taking things up as well, as a way of really leaning into Him. I love the Lent season, so I really hope that you are using it well and wisely. Now, today's episode is going to be looking at the Shroud of Turin. What is the Shroud of Turin? Good question. Where do I start with this? I'll talk about my experience of the Shroud of Turin in a moment. But as we approach Easter and resurrection, the burial cloths of Jesus are obviously mentioned in Scripture, and they're one of the pieces of evidence for the resurrection, because if you'd have stolen the body, you'd have took the burial clothes as well, because you wouldn't have unwrapped the body to then put it in your own wrappings to take it. So the fact that the burial clothes are there is a symbol and sign that the resurrection happened. Well, the question then is, what happened to those burial clothes? And that's what we're going to explore today. We're going to be talking about something called the Shroud of Turin, which is a cloth that is stored in the Chapel of the Holy Shroud. It's in a place called Turin, in a church called the St. John the Baptist in Turin. And it's a shroud that, the big issue is this. The church has got these relics. Relics are items that people claim to be the item that was used at the time, either by Jesus or by a Roman centurion. So that there's the spear that cuts the side of Jesus's side, his crucifixion, and there are people that claim to have these items that were from that time. They're called relics, and many of them are forgeries and fakes. And there's no other way around it. They're just fakes. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff knocking around. And there's one item called the Shroud of Turin, which is being stored in this church in Turin. And for the last 30-odd years, lots of people have believed it to be a medieval forgery because of some carbon dating that was done in the 80s, quite famous carbon dating. And it's just got relegated into it's a fake. And the reality is, for those of us that are evangelical, these items that the Catholic Church have that claim to be the holy cup that Jesus used at the Last Supper, that kind of thing, we've written them off as just outright garbage, the whole lot of them. And the danger with that is the evangelical church then may have missed a key piece of real historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. And that item that could be great evidence for the resurrection is this burial cloth of Jesus. And it is a cloth you can see. I want you to go and Google it. And what I'd love to do today is just tell you about it, because lots of evangelicals don't know it exists, don't know anything about it. I've asked in gatherings before, just raise your hand if you've heard of the Shroud of Turin, and like nobody has a clue about this, because it's been written off as a fake. So what I'd love to do today is tell you a bit about it, because there is gathering evidence that would argue that it is not a fake, that it's not a forgery, it's not from the Middle Ages, and actually it is what it claims to be. And I'll talk you through the evidence of this. Let me tell you about the first time I heard about the Turin Shroud. So I heard about the Turin Shroud in the 80s. I was a kid of the 80s, and I'm a big Indiana Jones fan, and love that sense of archaeology. And I remember having a conversation with my dad, who told me about the Shroud of Turin. And at the time, in the newspapers, quite famous pictures of scientists showing this carbon dating and how it was a fake. And my dad watched tons of videos and TV shows on it at the time, and I remember watching them with him. But I've always been really interested. In fact, I've been so interested in the Shroud of Turin that when I was at art college, I tried to reproduce the Shroud of Turin on some linen cloth, and I had to do a full-size replica of it, and it hung up in, and it was this whole play on a reproduction of what would be a fraudulent document, a fraudulent item. And made a video of me trying to sell it outside the Catholic church in Leeds city centre. Art students do crazy things, don't they? But I've just always been really interested in Shroud of Turin. I've been tracking with it for a long, long time. Read bunches of books, probably every 2 or 3 years. Just read another book on it, and read another book on it, read another book on it. And just this last 6 months, there's a book that's come out again on the Shroud of Turin with some really interesting new evidence that claims that actually it's authentic. And the book is called Shroud Encounter: Explore the World's Greatest Unsolved Mystery. And it's written by a guy called Russ Bereault, Breault. And it's just a really interesting book. What he has attempted to do here is just gather all of the evidence for the Shroud of Turin that is out there, gathering all the evidence. He's the president of the Shroud of Turin Education Project. So, we already know that he's pro. He's pro this. And what he's done is gathered the evidence to try and make an argument to show that it is real. There are lots of other books that have come out like this, other pieces of research that have come out recently. And what I want to do is give you the lowdown on the Shroud of Turin, and you are then welcome to go and do your own research on it. Please, please, please go. Watch YouTube. Do some research. Don't believe me, but I think it's really, if Jesus rose from the dead, and if the scripture is true that the linen cloths were folded and tidied away in the tomb, then actually there is no reason why we couldn't still have them today if somebody had taken them and looked after them. Right, that's the preamble, and it's already knocking on. So I'm going to jump in really quick and tell you more on the Turin Shroud. So let's go to that middle part jingle. Fantastic. Well, I already feel that this is going to be a long episode, so look, forgive me. I'm gonna walk you through the evidence that the Shroud of Turin is a legitimate item, and please be googling as look up pictures as I walk through this evidence. So John 20:6-7 says, "Then Simon Peter came, following him, went into the tomb." He's following John. "He saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth which had been on Jesus's head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself." I'm going to be talking today not about the face cloth. I'm going to be talking about the grave clothes, now known as the Shroud of Turin, as I want to argue to you. I'm not going to talk about the headcloth because that's a whole nother archaeological item, which we can debate separately. So, friends, what happened was the shroud has been stored since 1578, 1500s, in this church in Turin. Pre that, it was under ownership of a number of different private individuals who owned it privately, and eventually it was decided it needed to be on public display, so it's been there since. If you go to the Chapel of the Holy Shroud, what is on display every day is a copy of the shroud. The actual shroud is in storage, in safekeeping, so it doesn't get damaged. And it was brought out in the 80s, and in the 80s a bunch of scientists were allowed to take a cutting of a corner and some of the weave, and were able to go and do some studies on it. And one thing that happened was a photographer took some pictures of it, and when he was developing, that's the word I'm looking for, developing the photographs, he realised that actually the Shroud of Turin behaves like a photographic negative. It's like a negative, and if you flip it, actually you can see a face in the shroud. Now, you can see a face in the negative, but when you photograph it and flip it, you actually get to really see this incredible face that's in the shroud. So he took some pictures, and actually that photographer really has come to believe that the shroud, he was a Jewish guy, and he has really come to believe that the shroud is authentic, which is just an interesting twist of the tale. But the scientists that did the carbon 14 dating, this is 1988, They radiocarbon dated, and the radiocarbon dated brought it out as a medieval period cloth. So somewhere around 1260 through to 1390 after Jesus. And this really became the argument that it was a Middle Age forgery. It was a fake. And they couldn't work out how it had been made. But they said, well, actually, the cloth shows us through carbon dating that actually it's from the Middle Ages. And what ended up happening was that data has been under question more and more as people have further studied the shroud and realised that the whole section that they cut off was from a section that had been repaired. And it had been repaired, and we know it's been repaired because that section does not have the same cloth linen in it. So the actual linen cloth has no cotton in there apart from this particular corner where it's mixed. So we know it's a contaminated corner. But we also know there was a fire, and there was a period of time it was in a fire. We know it's in a fire because it's got burn marks on it, and the argument is actually the carbon dating is being skewed because of the repairs that have been done to it during the Middle Ages and this fire that had happened to it. So many people have gone on to say, well, actually, we think this data is just wrong from the carbon dating. But that's kind of where we've been left for a long time. It's fake. Well, friends, new dating techniques have been developed over the last number of years. And there's a new technique, and this is what it's called, the technique, the multi-parametric mechanical luminescence. Okay? MPML. And it's been developed by researchers in the University of Sheffield. And what it does is it uses light emissions to bounce off the material, and by doing this you can work out when that organic material essentially was exposed to sunlight for its growth. So you can work out how old something is using this particular new form of aging on organic materials. And the research was published kind of mid-2024, so just last year. And they are suggesting that there's a date range of the shroud's fibres. And if you were to take the middle number, so older, younger, so 100 years before, 100 years later, let's go for the middle number. If you were to do that, it simply is placed 2,000 years. The aging of it is 2,000 years old. So it becomes an item that was placed in the right time scale as it being one that's used by Jesus. So these new techniques measure what's called the photoluminescence, the properties of the flax fibers. And by taking a sample, they're able to do this test, and the conclusion is it is of the right time scale. Now, this test needs to be done again, and it needs to be done under scrutiny to really like thumbs up, yes, this is right. At the moment, it's not being done. It's not been done under all of the scientific measures that you might want to do to really be confident saying this is, but what these guys are saying is, look, it is about 2,000 years old. So this is new evidence that is coming out. So because of this, it's given people the confidence to reapproach the Turin shroud and say, well, actually, what else do we know about it? Because the reality is, friends, if you forget about the carbon-14 dating, there's so much going on with the shroud which gives us some confidence in being able to date it. But also how strange it is as I keep calling it a document, but obviously it's a cloth. But in terms of a document, we're trying to work out the age of this cloth document, this shroud. So there's a few things that are really interesting about it. So let me just share this with you. So number one, when you photograph the shroud, yes, you get this negative image, but if you were to put it under what's called a VP8 image analyzer, then what ends up happening is what is produced is a 3D image. So the argument is that within the cloth, stored in the cloth, is data of a 3D image. So if you approach it as a negative, photo negative, and approach it and scan it with this image analyzer, what you end up with is a 3D image of the face of a man and the whole body of a man, which is really quite spectacular. So stored in the cloth is not a 2D image like a painting, but more like a photograph. It's got 3D data inside it. So actually what they've been able to do is they've scanned it in terms of this image analyzer, and it pulls out 3D data. One of the things that they've been able to do from this, which is really cool, is 3D print or 3D create the entire body of the man in the shroud, because they can see, because of the way that the cloth has stored the data, you can see the distance between the cloth and the body. So when the body is further away, so one of the things we know is that the knee of the individual is bent upwards, as in the shape of the crucifixion. So that, you know, Jesus' feet, one foot on top of the other, one of his knees would have been bent in front of the other. So I think it's the left leg that is bent, one is straight, and you actually see that data in the cloth, which is quite spectacular. But there's other techniques, digital image processing. So they've actually taken these 3D images, and they've put it through digital image processing and actually pulled out 3D faces. So you can Google this stuff, and there's lots of pictures online of the face of the man of the shroud. And it's just really interesting to actually be able to draw that data from the cloth and say this is what the man looks like. So that's quite a fun thing. They've laser scanned it. They've done something called the raking light photography method that looks at sharp angles and shapes in there. And actually the conclusion is this shroud actually holds 3D data, 3D information of the man that is in it. Now, if this was a painting, or something that had been created by a person, all of this data wouldn't exist, because you wouldn't be putting that data in. If you paint a picture, then all you are doing is you are putting enough data in there so you know what that face looks like. Whereas what we see here is 3D data, as in the same as a photography negative. Photography wasn't invented, I can't remember the date, but a lot later than the Middle Ages. So we know that this was something that the technology to create it at the time didn't exist. So it's not a painting. There's no paint on the shroud. There's no mediums on the shroud. But the face of the shroud is in the cloth. Now, an interesting point, the image is only on the cloth as deep as a hair. So it's only the surface of the shroud, the very faintest surface. So if you just scrape it, it would almost disappear. So it's so thin, the image layer on the cloth. It's not something that goes all the way through the cloth. It's literally just on the surface, and it's as deep as a hair. So it's so faint on the shroud. So this image has very unusual characteristics. It's superficial, so it's only on the top part of the fibres. Has no direction to it, so it's obviously not been painted with a brush stroke, or it's got no pigments in there. It's definitely not a painting, because there is none of these coloured pigments. It's something on the shroud itself that's created this image of a man. Forgive me. So this image isn't one that's been created by any human techniques in the sense of being painted. But what we do know is that the man of the shroud is anatomically correct. It's perfect in its form and shape of the person in it. We also know that the blood flow, so the blood flow that is on the shroud, so the blood that's on the shroud, we know it is anatomically correct. The blood flow is flowing in the right directions and going in the right patterns. It's gathering in the right places for it to actually be a real person that had been wrapped in it. And what is really interesting is the blood that is on the shroud is human blood. It's type AB, and that blood is high in something called bilirubin. And bilirubin is something that is in your blood when you've gone through high levels of stress and trauma. It's something that's released into your blood, and it can, if somebody's died a very traumatic death, you can work that out in their blood. So their bloods tell you a story. Well, the man of the shroud, his blood is AB. It's got high levels of bilirubin, so we know this person had a traumatic experience before that blood was pulled on the cloth. So if you were just to cut yourself and use that to paint it on, it would not have the bilirubin in there. And there's absolutely no reason why an artist in the Middle Ages would even know this stuff. Like, this was not stuff that was known at that time or era. So it's anatomically correct, and what we can see is the forensic analysis shows us that the blood flow patterns are consistent with crucifixion wounds. And now, knowing the knowledge that we have, we can see that this blood has behaved in the way we expect it to behave on the cloth for somebody who has recently been crucified. One other thing, the thing that we can also see through the shroud is, so in the Middle Ages, if you look at the artwork in the Middle Ages of Jesus' crucifixion, Jesus was always crucified with nails through his hands. The man of the shroud, the crucifixion is through his wrists. And what we now know about crucifixion from other evidence that is out there of Roman crucifixion is that they weren't crucified through the hands, they were crucified through the wrists. So the shroud has information in it about crucifixion that now has been proven through everything else that we now know about. So there's a really good example of the arm of a man, his bones, the arm of a man who was crucified by Romans, where the nail is still in the bones where it got stuck, and it's through the wrist, not through the hand. And we've actually got that from archaeological evidence. So that's quite interesting. So in other words, if it was being created in the Middle Ages, they wouldn't have put the holes and the blood from the wrist, you put them through the hands. So let's turn to some more evidence. I think this is where it gets really, really, really interesting. So if you go on holiday, your clothing picks up pollen. If you go to the beach, your clothes picks up sand. All of that, by a scientist, can be gathered and work out where you've come from. You know, we can work out where somebody has been by what pollen is on their clothing. So there's pollen evidence. On the shroud, there is evidence of pollen from plants that only come from in and around Jerusalem. And what's really interesting is that they're only in bloom at certain times of year. And it's around the springtime that these plants are in bloom. Now, there's a man called Max Frey, F-R-E-I. He did some research. He's a Swiss criminologist, and he collected tape samples from the shroud in 1973 and 1978. And what he was able to do is identify approximately 58 different types of pollen that were on the shroud. And when he did so, what he found was this, that the pollen, there was enough evidence of the pollen coming from Jerusalem and the Middle East for these specific plants. Now, I'm going to butcher the names of these plants. So the first one is a thorn plant that's native to Israel and the surrounding regions. It's called Gundelia tourniforti. That's on there. Zygophyllum domasum. That's a plant that grows in Israel, Jordan, and Sinai. Citrus crestus is a rock rose common in the Mediterranean region. And there's a caper plant found in Israel and Palestine that's on there as well. So what we're saying is there is pollen on the shroud that locates it from the right region, from the Israel region. Now, what it also has on there is other pollen that seems to make sense of what we would describe as the presumed journey that the shroud went on, from what we understand about the shroud. So there's one called the Anatolia from modern Turkey. There's pollens from Istanbul and other kind of European locations. There's a number of pollens from the desert areas, plants from the Dead Sea region are also on there as well. So there's a whole collection of pollens. But if this was a medieval forgery and it comes out of Italy, say, then you would expect it to have, you would expect it to not have the pollen on it that locates it back in Jerusalem. So the fact that these pollens on there are like a GPS locator for us, so we can see where this cloth has come from. I'm going to keep pressing on because if not, we'll be here all day. Let me talk about the linen cloth makeup. So the cloth is a 3-1 herringbone twill pattern, and it's woven in a really unusual, complex 3-1 herringbone twill pattern on the cloth. And this patterning is rarely found in medieval Europe. It's technically complex, and it's of a linen composition. And this twill, we call it the Z-twist thread. It's a spinning pattern that's common in the Near East. The European twill would tend to have what we call an S twist, and is more standard. So it's a very strange Z twist, they call it, the herringbone pattern, which would locate it as something that was coming from the region of Israel. It's a historic fabric that they've recognized that there are similarities between the shrouds weave and the first century Jewish textiles that have come out of Masada and other archaeological sites. So other cloths have been dug up from the region of the Dead Sea, Jerusalem, Galilee, match the twill twist, Z twist, that's found in the thread of the Shroud of Turin. So actually the cloth's herringbone pattern is another place to locate it, in the sense of it's pure, it's not got mixtures of threads in there, and it's of the right herringbone pattern to match it to the right Middle East. It's also matching the descriptions of the shroud that we find in sense of the Bible. So the descriptor of the shroud as the burial cloth of Christ, it looks like that. It kind of matches what you would expect it to match. Right, I'm going to keep moving on. Can I tell you about the coins? This is really fun. So from the naked eye, you can't really see, but on the man of the shroud, there does seem to be some circular discs over his eyes. People have often just thought it's his eyelids, but actually what they've been able to do through that photogrammetry, by actually using microscopic photography, they can actually see, it's not evident by the naked eye, but they can actually see that on the eyes of the man of the shroud there are coins, and these coins are dated to the 1st century. There's things on them that make sense of them coming from the 1st century. So the coins identified by some researchers are reportedly Pontius Pilate. It says the word lepton on there. Coins minted specifically between 29 and 32 CE, aligning them with the time of Jesus. So what they've done is they've zoomed in with the photography, and they can get data from the shroud, imagery from the shroud that's not great by the human eye, but these coins are seen when they zoom in, and you can see on there that there's a shepherd's crook on the coin. You can see that it says UCAI, which is short for Tiberius Caesar. And it would be really strange for any middle-aged forgery to ever even thought about putting coins on eyes, because that wasn't something that was done in Europe. This was very much something that happened in the Middle East when somebody was buried. It'd be almost near impossible to forge these coins without modern knowledge of what would have been on them from archaeological digs that we've now done. So there's the coin details on the eyes, which is just really interesting. And then the final thing I want to just say is around the so if the shroud existed, then people would have said something about it, or they would have drawn pictures of it, and actually that's kind of what happened. So there's numbers of icons where there is a face on a cloth referenced, either on above the door of a city, depicted in the sense of there's one image painted of a man coming out of a box, and actually when you look at it carefully, what you realize is it's the man on a cloth coming out of a box, as if out of this box is being presented this cloth, the burial cloth of Christ, and what's depicted is you kind of go, that's pretty much what's on the shroud. So these artistic representations, and there's numbers of them. So there's the Pray Codex from 1192. It's a little bit later, but it's definitely before the Middle Ages, and it contains illustrations of a burial cloth with a herringbone weave, with burn holes on it, matching the Shroud of Turin. So if people say, well, this is Middle Age forgery, well, unfortunately, this document shows us that there's drawings of it going back to the 1100s. There's one called the Byzantine Christ icon. It's from the 6th to 7th century, and what's interesting about this is the image of Jesus is taking inspiration from the Shroud of Turin, to the point where on the Shroud of Turin there is a droplet of blood on the man of the shroud's forehead, in almost the shape of a 3, and the icon that's been painted in the 6th century also has a blood mark in the shape of a 3 on the icon. So the idea is the icon has been painted to depict the man of the shroud as if he was a real man. So what they've done is they've painted Christ in what inspiration they can get from the shroud itself. There's the image of Edessa. It's a historical document from the 6th century, which mentions a cloth bearing the miraculous image of Christ's face, believed to be most researchers to be the folded Shroud of Turin, and the image was reportedly brought to Constantinople in 944. So the idea is the shroud was in Constantinople in 944, and the image of Edessa was then written about and talked about. This is Christ's face. There's also mosaics from the 5th and 6th century. The Ravenna mosaics, Ravenna, and these are mosaics that seem to document the shroud, and the images in the mosaics displayed are so similar to the image of the face found in the shroud, even down to the blood and the angle of the face and everything like that. So there are, in other words, paintings and drawings of items that look like the shroud going all the way back. So it's pretty evident that this item has moved around and been on tour, and different people have drawn it or created mosaics from it or icons from it as a way of recording what it looked like when the item was no longer there. So that's just another really interesting piece of evidence that when was, for example, if I said to you a book came out in 2010 and the date it was released was 2010, but yet you'd been to a library in 2000 and seen that book on the shelf, then you say, well, no, actually you're wrong, your dating is wrong because I saw it pre that. So that's what the artwork does, the artistry of the icons and the images and the writings are telling us its existence pre the Middle Ages. The final thing I will say then on the Shroud of Turin, which is quite interesting, is that scientists have yet to reproduce the image, either with an image with no brush strokes, no pigments, no obvious kind of painting techniques. The closest they've got is if you were to put a cloth in front of a light source and project that light source onto the cloth, a bright light source, it can create a similar kind of image, but what they found is the light source has to be even stronger to get anywhere near that to what's been produced on the shroud. And what's fun then is, well, actually, if the man of the shroud was created by an extreme bright light that was produced from the man, that burnt it onto the cloth, or somehow transferred this image onto the cloth, or changed the molecules of the cloth to create the image, that would kind of make sense. The fans of the resurrection was it was this amazing light that shone through, somehow created this image of the man on the shroud. Scientists have yet to reproduce it, though. They can't. You're still struggling to reproduce it, and trying to work out how to do it. They're getting a bit closer in terms of working out there's something around light here to produce this image, but it's definitely not painted, and it's definitely not with any technology that was used or available at the time of the Middle Ages. So this can't be a Middle Age forgery because the techniques weren't there. And the other thing I didn't say earlier on, which I think is really important about the blood, is when you look at the shroud, if you were to paint this, you would paint the man, and then you'd put the blood on, because you've now painted where you've outlined where the man is, there that you know where the blood is. But what we know on the shroud is the blood came first, and then the image came second. The blood came first, and the image came second, which isn't the way an artist would have created it. So it does look like the man was wrapped, blood off his body goes onto the shroud, and then in the resurrection, that creates the image through this bright light of some description. So there you've got this really interesting document, cloth, called the Shroud of Turin. I've been reading about this for absolute years and years and years and years, and I think it's an interesting piece of evidence of the resurrection. Now, if it turns out to be a forgery and fake, hey, my faith's not built upon it. But if the resurrection's real, then items like this should exist. There's another piece of evidence, which is the face cloth, which I'm not going to look at today because that's a whole other ballgame. But what's really interesting about the face cloth is, friends, the blood on the shroud matches the blood on the face cloth. And the face cloth does also seem to be older than the Middle Ages. So they're identical. They definitely are two things that belong together at one time, but were separated out at some point. And the blood on both match. So these two things do come together. They're meant to be of one item, but have been separated. So you got the Shroud of Turin, then you got the face cloth, which has another name as well. But friends, there you go. So what I've done is I've wanted to give you information on the Shroud of Turin, which typically has been written off in modern times as a Middle Age fake. I really don't think it is. I think there's stacking evidence now that really starts to show that this is of more interest than it simply being a Middle Age forgery. I think as we look at resurrection, as we approach Easter, it's really interesting to know that this thing exists. You can go look at it and see it. There's books about it that you can read about it, but it's almost, I would say, become one of the church's best kept secrets. People just don't know it exists, which I find thoroughly interesting. So I just want you to know this thing exists, and you can look at it and have fun looking at it, read books on it, because I think I'm more convinced it's real than I am convinced that it's fake. If there's a pendulum, I'm swinging towards, yes, I think this is real, more than I am swinging towards it, I think it's fake. Am I all in? Well, no, because I'm always interested to learn. I think it's very dangerous to be committal on something you can't be committal on. But I think it's really interesting. I think there's enough evidence here to tell me, yeah, I think it's real. So, friends, I'd love to know what you think. What do you reckon? Send me a private DM. You might think Chris Rogers, well, he's a bit of a nutter, isn't he? You might see this as a bit of a conspiracy theory kind of thing. He's a bit of a crazy guy. I'm an archaeologist. I want to be an archaeologist. In the sense of I want to look at archaeology. I want to look at history. I want to look at what other evidence is out there that helps us form a good argument on the resurrection of Jesus. So there we have it. We've walked through it bit by bit. If you want more detail, then I would definitely say one of the best books I've read for a long time is The Shroud Encounter by Russ Breault. I'll put the information on this book in the show notes, but there are other books as well that are coming out all the time. So I'd love to encourage you to maybe have a look at one of those books. Friends, until next time, grace and peace. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this episode.